I have been called many things in my life: formidable, cold, precise. A man whose silences cost other men sleep. I was not troubled by any of these. I had cultivated them in the way one cultivates a hedge, not for beauty, but for what it keeps out. What I had never been called, in 37 years of navigating the most calculated drawing rooms in England, was outmatched. That changed in the autumn of my 37th year, at a place called Ashby Court, in the Midlands of England, on a Tuesday evening in October, over a dish of cold pheasant, and a woman who looked at me the way a scholar looks at a text she has already read and found wanting. Her name was Lady Maren Ashby. She was the sole heir to the Ashby earldom, 12,000 acres, a seat in the county, and a fortune that had made every ambitious family in England sharpen their pencils for the better part of a decade. She was 26 years old. She had been managed since birth by her uncle, Sir Rowan Ashby, a man of great administrative talent and very little scruple, who had positioned himself as the steward of both her lands and her future, and saw no meaningful distinction between the two. I arrived at Ashby Court on the 4th of October, sent by my own family's design. My uncle, Lord Calder of the Northern Branch, had made the calculation plainly over dinner in London 3 weeks prior. The Ashby lands bordered 3 of our tenant holdings. A marriage would consolidate them, resolve 2 boundary disputes that had been grinding through the courts for 11 years, and secure the Calder line's position in the Midlands for a generation. Lady Maren was of age, unmarried, and reportedly manageable, though her uncle had been unusually protective of access. The Duke of Ashford would present himself. He would be charming. He would be appropriate. He would secure the match. I had listened to this with the expression, "I keep for things I find distasteful, but not impossible." I was the Duke of Ashford. I was capable of being charming for a defined period of time, in pursuit of a defined objective, without it costing me anything I valued. I had done it before. I would do it cleanly, settle the lands question, and return to London by November. That was the plan. I want to be clear about what the plan was, because I want you to understand precisely how completely it failed. The carriage rolled through the Ashby gates on a gray afternoon, the parkland going amber and copper around us, the house itself rising at the end of a long avenue of elms with the unhurried confidence of a building that had stood for 2 centuries and expected to stand for 2 more. It was a handsome house. I noted it with the part of my mind that catalogues property, and filed it. Sir Rowan Ashby met me at the steps. He was a lean man in his middle 50s, with the manner of someone who has spent a great many years being useful to people more powerful than himself, and has found this a perfectly satisfactory arrangement. He shook my hand with both of his. He said he was most honored. He said Ashby Court was at my disposal. He said Lady Maren was looking forward to welcoming me and would join us for dinner. I said the appropriate things. I was shown to a well-appointed set of rooms. A fire had been laid. Someone had put flowers on the mantelpiece, which struck me as an optimistic touch. I changed for dinner. I came down at the appointed hour. Lady Maren Ashby was already in the dining room when I arrived. She was standing at the far window with a book open in her hands, reading, and she did not look up immediately when I entered. I will admit this was not what I had expected. I had expected the managed, cautious, carefully presented young woman Sir Rowan had implied. Someone who would sit correctly and speak carefully and not disrupt the proceedings. She was dressed simply for the rank, a gown of deep blue wool, her dark hair arranged with more efficiency than ornament, a single strand of pearls at her throat. She was not plain, and she was not a beauty in the conventional manner. What she was, I noticed even before she turned, was contained. There was a quality to the way she stood, even alone, even reading, that suggested a person who had learned to take up precisely as much space as she intended and not an inch more. She turned when Sir Rowan entered behind me, and she looked at me. I have looked into the eyes of magistrates, dukes, ministers of the crown, and one particularly unnerving retired general who had lost 2 fingers at Waterloo and seemed not to have minded. None of them looked at me quite the way Lady Maren Ashby did in that first moment. It was not hostility. It was not shyness. It was assessment, quick, thorough, and apparently conclusive. She closed her book. She curtsied with the precise degree of deference due to my rank and not one fraction more. "Your Grace," she said, "welcome to Ashby Court. I hope the roads were not too punishing." "Tolerable," I said. "Good." She moved to the table. "I have seated you across from me rather than at the end. Sir Rowan finds the formal arrangement more appropriate, but I find it makes conversation feel like shouting across a field, which suits neither of us." Sir Rowan's expression flickered. Mine, I kept still. "Quite right," I said, and took my seat. The first course arrived. Sir Rowan steered the conversation with the practiced ease of a man who had been steering conversations involving Lady Maren for some years, asking about my journey, about the state of the northern roads, about a mutual acquaintance in Derbyshire. Maren ate her soup and allowed it. It was during the pheasant that she spoke again, directly, and changed the character of the evening entirely. "May I ask, Your Grace," she said, setting down her fork with the deliberateness of someone about to say something they have considered, "what specifically brings you to Ashby at this time of year? The season is finished. Most gentlemen of your position are at their own estates by October." Sir Rowan's hand moved fractionally toward his wine glass. "I had business in the Midlands," I said, "and I have long wished to see Ashby Court. Its reputation is considerable." "The estate's reputation," she said, "or mine?" A beat of silence. "Both," I said. "That is a very tidy answer," she said. She picked up her fork again. "I have found that very tidy answers are generally concealing something somewhat less tidy, but we have only just met, and I have no wish to be impolite. The pheasant is good, I think. It came from the East Coverts." I looked at her. She was eating her pheasant with complete composure. "It is very good," I said. "Yes." She glanced up, and there it was again, that quality of having already read the text and found it familiar. "I expect we will have time to be less tidy with one another before your visit concludes, Your Grace. There is generally time when one is at Ashby for more than a week." "And how long do you expect my visit to be?" I asked. She considered this. "That," she said pleasantly, "rather depends on how the argument goes." I blinked. Sir Rowan made a small, distressed sound that he converted into a cough. "I beg your pardon," I said. "I find," said Lady Maren, returning to her pheasant, "that I can determine the quality of a person's company in inverse proportion to how long it takes for us to disagree about something meaningfully. Men who agree with everything I say are very dull guests. Men who disagree reflexively, without thinking, are only slightly less so. But a genuine argument, that takes something. I am hoping, Your Grace, that you are capable of one." I sat with this for a moment. Then I said, "What would you like to argue about?" She looked up. For the first time, something shifted at the corner of her mouth, not quite a smile, but the precursor to one. "Well," she said, "we could begin with the enclosure question. I understand the Calder holdings in the north have enclosed 3 common fields in the last decade. I have views on that." Sir Rowan set down his wine glass with a small click of resignation. I leaned back in my chair. "So do I," I said, "and I suspect they differ from yours considerably." "I suspect they do," she agreed. "Shall we?" I have had many dinners in my life. That was the first one I did not want to end. We argued about enclosure for 2 hours. I was not wrong, and neither was she. We were simply operating from different premises, which is the most interesting kind of argument, the kind that does not resolve but that teaches you something about the shape of another mind. Her thinking was not soft. She had read deeply, more deeply than I had expected, more deeply than Sir Rowan clearly knew, and she did not argue from feeling but from evidence, citing specific cases, specific outcomes, the testimony of specific displaced families recorded in the county reports. I had to sharpen my own position twice in response to things she said. I could not remember the last time I had been required to sharpen a position at a dinner table. When we finally rose, and Sir Rowan excused himself with the transparent relief of a man released from an unexpectedly athletic afternoon, Lady Marin walked with me to the foot of the staircase. "You argued well," she said, not a compliment, an observation. "As did you," I said. She looked at me with that level, reading quality. "You were not expecting to," she said. "It was not a question." I considered denying it. I did not. "No," I said, "I was not." She nodded, as though this confirmed something she had already decided. "Good night, Your Grace. Breakfast is at 8. I ride at 7 if you care to join me, though the ground is muddy and you will need to borrow boots, the east coverts, if you want to see where the good pheasant comes from." She went up the stairs. I watched her go. I stood at the foot of the staircase for a moment longer than was strictly necessary. Then I went to my rooms, sat at the writing desk, and stared at the wall for a considerable time. I had been sent here with a commission. I had arrived this afternoon intending to execute it with the clean efficiency I brought to all such matters. Court the lady, secure the understanding, settle the lands question, return to London. What I had not factored into this plan was the possibility that the lady would be interesting. I borrowed the boots. I was at the stable yard at 7. She was already mounted, a good dark bay mare, nothing showy, chosen for ground sense. She looked at my borrowed boots with a flicker of what might have been approval or might have been amusement. The distinction was not always clear with Lady Marin. We rode for an hour across the eastern grounds, and she talked about the land. Not in the polite, decorative way of someone performing their connection to an estate for the benefit of a visitor, but with the matter-of-fact fluency of someone who had walked every field personally and knew what it produced and what it cost and where the drainage was poor and where it was good. She pointed out a disputed boundary line with the next holding with the same tone she might use to point out a feature on a map. "That line has been wrong for 40 years, she said. "My father knew it. Sir Rowan knows it. No one has moved to correct it because correcting it would require admitting that the survey of 1791 was incompetent, which would embarrass the Trent family, who commissioned it, and Sir Rowan is not in the business of embarrassing families he may one day need." "And you," I asked, "what are you in the business of?" She considered the boundary line. "Running this estate correctly," she said. "Eventually." "Eventually." "I am 26, she said evenly, "and I have been told in various ways since I was 16 that I will be permitted to make decisions about this land when I am deemed ready. I have not yet been deemed ready." She paused. "Sir Rowan deems things on a timeline I have not been able to determine." I said nothing. The horses moved through the wet grass. "You are wondering," she said, without looking at me, "whether I am telling you this as a strategy." "The thought had occurred," I said. "It is not a strategy," she said. "It is the truth. I am telling you because you argued about enclosure last night as though you actually cared about the outcome rather than about winning the argument, and that is unusual enough that I thought you might be capable of hearing an honest thing without immediately trying to use it. I absorbed this. That is a very direct assessment of a man you met yesterday." "I have been managed by indirect people for 10 years, she said. "I find I no longer have patience for indirection when it is not necessary." She turned to look at me, steady and clear. "You were sent here for a reason, Your Grace. I knew it when you arrived. I would rather we both acknowledged that and proceeded from there than performed this courtship as though it were something it is not." My horse shifted beneath me. "Very well," I said. "You are right that I was sent here." "By your family." "Yes." "For the land." A pause. "That was the original proposition, yes." She looked at me for a long moment. Then she turned her horse and started back toward the house. "Thank you," she said, over her shoulder. "That is the first entirely honest thing any man has said to me in a very long time. I suggest we have breakfast. I find I can tolerate a great deal more from a person who tells me the truth before 9 in the morning." I followed her back. I was not entirely sure what had just happened, except that it had not gone according to any version of the plan I had outlined. The days at Ashby settled into a pattern that I had not anticipated and found, increasingly, that I did not want to alter. Mornings, we rode or walked the grounds, or, on the days when the weather came in hard and gray across the Midlands, sat in the library. The library was the best room in the house. 2 stories of shelved volumes, a gallery running around the upper level, a fireplace large enough to heat the room properly, and windows that looked over the frost-edged kitchen garden. Lady Marin worked there in the mornings with the focused efficiency of someone who regarded the estate accounts, and the correspondence and the land reports not as administrative burdens, but as the actual substance of her days. I had not intended to work in the library. I had brought correspondence of my own, which I addressed to my rooms. But on the 3rd morning I came down earlier than expected and found her already at the great oak desk, surrounded by maps and ledgers, a pen in her hand, and I sat at the other end of the room with the book I had taken from the shelf, and we worked in silence for 2 hours. It was among the most companionable silences I had experienced in my adult life. She did not perform for me. That was the thing I kept arriving at, in the mornings and the evenings and the long walks across the muddy grounds. Every woman I had spent extended time with, and there had been several, in the years before I had concluded that extended time with most people was more trouble than the company warranted, had performed in some degree. Performed ease or warmth or interest or virtue. Lady Marin simply was. She was sharp when something was sharp. She was quiet when she was thinking. She laughed on the occasion something was genuinely funny, without checking first whether laughing was appropriate. She ate her breakfast without ceremony. She argued without quarter. She did not soften her opinions for me, and she did not amplify them either. She simply held them as one holds a tool, with the grip of someone who knows how to use it. I found I was adjusting my own comportment in her company in ways I could not fully account for. I was more direct. I was less careful about the impression I was making and more interested in what she thought. I caught myself, more than once, wondering what her opinion would be on something I had read, and then, occasionally, asking her. She always had one. It was not always the same as mine. It was always worth hearing. The arguments continued. We argued about the proper management of tenant holdings. We argued about the role of Parliament in land reform. We argued, one memorable afternoon in the long gallery, walking the length of the family portraits, about the nature of duty, whether duty was a cage or a foundation, whether a person could be genuinely free within it or only pretend to be. "You think it is a foundation," she said, stopping in front of a portrait of a grim-faced man in a 17th century ruff. "I do," I said. "You think that because duty has never prevented you from doing anything you actually wanted to do," she said. "Duty for a man of your position is largely theoretical. You choose the duties you acknowledge and decline the ones you don't." "That is a generous interpretation of how much freedom a duke actually has," I said. "It is an accurate one." She turned from the portrait and looked at me. "Duty for me has meant being told, since I was 16, that I may not sign the estate accounts because I am not yet ready, that I may not dismiss the steward I know to be incompetent because the timing is not right, that I may not refuse the introductions my uncle arranges because it would be ungrateful, that I may not—" She stopped. She turned back to the portrait. "This was my great-great-grandfather," she said, in a different tone. "He built the East Wing. He was reportedly very stubborn." "I can see the resemblance," I said. She turned sharply. Something shifted in her face, and then she laughed. Not a polite laugh. An actual one, sudden and genuine, and it changed the entire quality of the gallery, the gray afternoon light somehow warmer. I felt something in my chest that I had not felt in a long time, and did not immediately have a name for. "I did not come here to be managed," she said, when the laugh had settled. It was quiet and not directed at me, more at the portrait or the room or the years in it. "I have been managed my entire life. I am very tired of it." "I know," I said. She looked at me. "Do you?" "I was sent here to do exactly that," I said. "To present myself advantageously, to be charming and appropriate and secure an agreement about a parcel of land. I was not." I stopped. "I was not accustomed to saying things before I had fully decided to say them. I was not told to be interested in you. That was not part of the commission." She was very still. "But you are," she said. "Yes," I said, rather inconveniently. She looked at me for a long moment. The gray light came through the gallery windows and lay across the portraits and the floor and the quiet space between us. "Tell me something true," she said. "Not about the land, not about your family's interests, something true." I thought about it. I did not rush it. She would know if I rushed it. "I have not argued seriously with anyone in 4 years," I said. "Not genuinely, not the kind of argument that requires me to reconsider my own position. I had decided this was because there was no one worth arguing with. I am now obliged to consider that I was simply not being presented with the right material." She was quiet for a moment. "That is an honest thing," she said. "I am capable of them," I said. "Occasionally." The corner of her mouth moved. "I have noticed," she said. "Good evening, Your Grace." And she walked back toward the far end of the gallery, unhurried and self-contained, and left me standing in front of the portrait of the stubborn great-great-grandfather. I stood there for rather a long time. The letter from my uncle arrived on the 17th day of October. I had known it was coming. I had not written to him in a week, which on the original timeline would have been the week in which I was supposed to have secured the preliminary understanding and be preparing to raise the matter of the boundary agreements. I had done neither. I had argued about agricultural reform and walked muddy fields and sat in a library in companionable silence and laughed. Once, in the long gallery, at something she said about a portrait, and I had not written to my uncle because every time I sat down to do so, I found I had nothing to say that would not require explaining things I was not ready to explain. The letter was not gentle. My uncle was not a gentle man. He laid out the situation with the precision of someone who has been in the business of managing complicated family interests for a long time and has very little patience for complications that arise from unexpected directions. The match was important. The time frame was not unlimited. Lady Marin was understood to be manageable if approached correctly. He trusted I was approaching her correctly. He expected a report. I read the letter in my rooms. I folded it. I sat with it for some time. Then I went down to the library. Marin was not there. The fire was burning low. I added coal without ringing for anyone, and sat in the chair at the end of the room I had come to think of as mine, and looked at the frost on the kitchen garden through the window and thought. I had been sent here with a commission. The commission was clear and its logic was sound. The Ashby lands and the Calder lands interlocking would benefit both families and settle a decade of legal friction. Lady Marin was a woman of rank and intelligence who would be a suitable match by any rational measure. The match was in her interests as well. It would resolve the question of the Ashby succession and give her a position from which she could not be managed indefinitely. It was a logical arrangement. The problem was that somewhere in the last 17 days, I had stopped being able to look at it as an arrangement. I had been with many people who were intelligent. I had met very few who were honest. The particular quality of Lady Marin's honesty, the way she held truth not as a virtue to perform, but as a working principle, a condition of doing business with the world, was not something I had encountered with any frequency, and I had not expected to encounter it here. I had come to Ashby Court to court a woman for her land. What I had found was a person. I was aware this was a problem. I was a duke with a commission and a family that had invested considerably in the expected outcome of this visit. I was not supposed to be sitting in a library at 10 in the evening, reviewing my entire approach to the situation, because a woman had laughed in a portrait gallery. But here I was. The orangery was at the far end of the east wing, a long, glass-fronted room that in summer was warm and fragrant, and in October was simply cold and still and full of dormant lemon trees standing in terracotta pots. I had walked through it once on my second day, and thought it a fine room for its season. I found Lady Marin there on the 18th evening, at perhaps 9 o'clock, standing at the far glass wall in the dark with a single candle on the ledge beside her, looking out at the frozen kitchen garden. I nearly withdrew. She had not heard me. Then she said without turning, "Come in if you like, your grace." I heard the door. I came in. The cold of the glass room settled around us. The candle threw a small, warm circle in the dark. "You were not at dinner," I said. "I had a headache," she said. "That is what Sir Rowan has told the table. In fact, I had a letter from a solicitor in London that I wished to read privately." I said nothing. The lemon trees stood around us in their pots, patient and bare. "My father's will," she said, "contained a provision. I was told when he died that the provision was straightforward, that the estate would pass to me outright on my marriage, and would be held in trust by Sir Rowan until that time. I was 16. I accepted this." She paused. "The solicitor's letter today suggests that the actual provision is somewhat more particular, that the trustees, Sir Rowan being the primary, retain certain rights of approval over the marriage itself. That he may, in effect, refuse a match he deems unsuitable, and the trust would continue." The cold of the orangery sat between us. "That is," I said carefully, "a considerable power." "Yes," she said, "it is." She turned from the glass. In the candlelight her face was very still. "I find I am wondering, your grace, whether Sir Rowan's introduction of you was as organic as it appeared, whether your visit was, in some degree, arranged with his advanced knowledge, whether the commission you arrived with came, at any remove, through a channel that included him. I was a man who had spent his life being precise in difficult conversations. I knew when the precise thing was the right thing. "My uncle and Sir Rowan are acquainted," I said. "Through what channel the introduction was made, I do not know with certainty. It is possible." She looked at me. "Probable." "Probable," I said. She turned back to the glass. A long silence. "So," she said finally, "I was managed after all." "Not by me," I said. Not in the way they intended." "Not for some time." "How long?" Her voice was level. "Since the first dinner," I said. "Approximately. Since the pheasant and the enclosure argument. I stopped being able to think of you as a commission somewhere between the boundary dispute and the portrait of your great-great-grandfather." She was very still. "That is either the most convenient thing a man in your position has ever said to me," she said quietly, "or the most honest." "It is honest," I said. "I am aware it is not a comfortable thing to offer, given everything, but I am no longer in a position to offer you anything else." The candle moved in a cold draught from the glass. The lemon trees stood their patient ground. "I want to be angry," she said at last. "I am angry at Sir Rowan. At the provision in my father's will. At the fact that every arrangement in my life has been made by other people, and I have had to discover this after the fact." She paused. "I am less angry at you than I would like to be, and I find that also somewhat inconvenient." "I can leave," I said. "In the morning, if you wish. I will write to my family and tell them the visit concluded without success. You have my word." She said nothing. "Or," I said, "I can stay, not as a commission, not as a managed thing, As a man who has spent 17 days arguing with you across every room in this house and cannot presently imagine returning to London and arguing with anyone else. The cold orangery held its breath. If you stay, she said slowly, it is not because Sir Rowan approved it. No, I said. And it is not because of the land. I no longer care about the land, I said, and realized as I said it that this was simply true. She turned from the glass and looked at me fully in the candlelight. I did not come here to be managed, she said. I said that to you in the gallery. I meant it. I know you did. I will not be managed. Her voice was steady and certain. Not by Sir Rowan, not by provisions in a will, not by a duke with a family commission, however honestly he eventually declares it. I will manage my own life, or I will not manage it at all. I would not have it any other way, I said. You would be a great deal less interesting if you were manageable. A long pause. That, she said, is also either a very convenient thing to say or a true one. It is both, I said. In this particular case, I find they are the same. She looked at me for a moment longer. Then she picked up the candle from the ledge. Good night, Your Grace, she said. I will think about what you have said. She walked past me, out of the orangery, taking the light with her. I stood in the dark among the lemon trees for a considerable time. I did not leave in the morning. I sent a letter to my uncle instead. A brief, precise, truthful letter, in which I told him that the visit to Ashby was continuing, that I did not expect the outcome to resemble the one he had outlined, and that I would write again when I had something definite to report. I was aware this would cause a considerable reaction. I filed the awareness and sent the letter. Lady Marin did not mention the orangery at breakfast. We ate and she read a report from the East Tenant Holdings, and I read the newspaper, and we were, in every visible respect, exactly as we had been before, except that I thought once that she glanced at me across the table with something in her expression that had not been there before, or had been there, but had been more carefully contained. The days continued. The arguments continued, though they had shifted in some quality I could not quite define, less like two minds testing their edges against each other, more like two minds building something together, using the friction of disagreement as the means. We argued about how the boundary dispute with the Trent holding might actually be resolved. She had ideas about this, practical and sharp, that I had not considered. We argued about the management of the Calder northern tenants, a subject on which she had read more than I had, and I found myself, not for the first time, genuinely revising a position in response to what she said. I wrote to my solicitor about the trust provision. The reply confirmed what she had been told. I showed it to her in the library on the 22nd day. She read it carefully. She set it down. Sir Rowan will not approve a match he cannot control, she said. No, I said, he will not. And yet here we are, she said. And yet here we are, I said. She looked at the document for a moment. My father, she said, quietly and without bitterness, was a man who loved this estate and was very certain that the people he trusted would manage it well. He was not wrong about the estate. He was perhaps less accurate about the people. I am sorry, I said. Don't be sorry, she said. Be useful. You are a duke with a solicitor and a barrister, and presumably some experience of contesting trust provisions that no longer serve their original purpose. I have, I said, rather a lot of experience. Then, she said, let us be useful. She pulled her chair around to my side of the table, which she had not done before. She smelled of cold air and something like wood smoke. She opened the document between us and pointed at the relevant clause. Here, she said. The discretionary language, that is where it is vulnerable. I looked at the clause. She was right. Yes, I said, it is. We worked in the library until the candles burned down. By the end of October, 3 things had happened. My uncle's second letter had arrived and been addressed. I had replied with more length and more firmness than the first, and made it clear that my presence at Ashby was no longer in the nature of a commission, but of a personal matter, and that he might direct any further representations to my London solicitor, who was already in correspondence with Lady Mary's. He had not replied. This was his way of being furious, which I was familiar with and could survive. Sir Rowan had made several attempts to restructure the visit, to arrange occasions at which he was present, to redirect the conversations, to insert himself into the easy pattern of the mornings and the library in ways that were unmistakably territorial. Lady Maren handled each of them with a precision that was remarkable to watch, polite, unhurried, deflecting nothing directly, but giving nothing ground. She had, I suspected, been managing Sir Rowan's management of her for years without his realizing it. And Maren and I had not resolved the argument, because I think we never will, in the sense that neither of us will ever run out of things to think about and push at and disagree about, which seems to me to be the only worthwhile definition of resolution, but arrived at something. A clarity, a settled understanding, reached not through any single declaration, but through a succession of days that had accumulated into something neither of us had quite named yet, but both of us recognized. I named it one morning in the library. She had been reading a letter, some correspondence about the east drainage that had been pending since summer, and she looked up and found me watching her. I did not look away. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "That I came here with a commission," I said, "which I have abandoned, that I have spent 24 days arguing with you and finding it the most interesting 24 days I have had in a decade. That I would like, if it is not entirely unwelcome, to know whether the next 24 years might be conducted along similar lines." She put down the letter, she looked at me, the fire crackled. 24 years, she said. "At minimum," I said. "That is a long argument," she said. "I expect we will find material," I said. She was quiet for a moment, then she said, "Say what you mean, Your Grace. No commissions, no arrangements, say what you mean." I had known this was coming. I had, in some part of myself, been preparing for it since the orangery. "I would like to marry you," I said, "not for the land which I have ceased to be able to think about, not because my family arranged this visit which I have ceased to honor. Because you are the only person in my recent memory who has made me think harder, speak more honestly, and feel more alive than I had thought I was capable of feeling, and the prospect of returning to London without you is one I find I cannot construct with any equanimity." She was very still. "Say it simply," she said. "I love you," I said. "That is the simple version. I am aware it is faster than is conventional. I am also aware that the conventional timeline was designed for people who are not paying attention, and I have been paying very close attention." A long pause. "I knew," she said slowly, "when you arrived that you had been sent here for the land. I decided, before dinner on the first night, that I would make it impossible for you to execute whatever commission you had arrived with." She paused. "I did not anticipate that making it impossible for you would require me to actually talk to you. I am occasionally undone by my own tactics." I waited. "I am not manageable," she said. "I want you to be clear about that. Not by Sir Rowan, not by my uncle's will, and not by you." "I would not know what to do with a manageable person," I said. "I would be deeply bored within a fortnight." The corner of her mouth moved. "You are still occasionally very convenient," she said. "Only occasionally," I said. "The rest of the time I am inconvenient and argumentative and very set in my opinions." "Yes," she said. "I know." She picked up the letter again, straightened it, set it down. "Ask me properly, Edmund." I had not heard her use my given name before. It did something considerable to me. I rose from my chair. I crossed the library. I stood before her. "Lady Maren Ashby," I said, "will you do me the very great honor and the very considerable inconvenience of marrying me?" She looked up at me. Something warm and unhurried and entirely unperformed moved across her face. "Yes," she said, "obviously. We were married in the spring, in the church at Ashby Village, before a congregation that included my uncle, who had eventually responded to the situation with a stiff but genuine warmth, and Sir Rowan, who had not, but had the good sense to attend anyway. The trust provision had been addressed through the courts, with the competent assistance of two very good barristers, and a judge who agreed that the discretionary language was, in fact, vulnerable. Marin signed the estate accounts herself for the first time the week after we returned from our wedding journey. She did it at the great oak desk in the library in the morning, with the winter light coming through the windows and the frost on the kitchen garden beginning, finally, to lift. I watched her. She did not perform it. She simply did it with the focused, unhurried efficiency of a person attending to the actual substance of their days. She looked up when she was done and found me watching. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "That I came to Ashby Court with a commission," I said, "and came away with considerably more than I arrived for." "You came away with an argument that will last the rest of your life," she said. "Yes," I said, "that is exactly what I mean." She held my gaze for a moment, steady, clear, warm, unperformed. Then she smiled. Not the corner of the mouth precursor, but the real one, the one that changed the quality of whatever room it was in. I had spent 37 years being the most formidable man in most rooms I entered. I have spent every year since being the most fortunate one.